Video will be critiquing or discussing Kane Kane Pixels, the oldest view beneath the earth video. I think that's his actual name, Kane Parsons, but anyway. Over its total, only as shown, some have, and I have also estimated, based on how much time is spent, that this distance would be at minimum 270 foot in distance and 190 feet in drop to go down the staircases depicted in this video, in this artwork. And as we can see from the entrance, when we look down, we can see all the way down and see a gray blob that appears to be the first landing. This thing is an idea that you find a hole in the ground underneath a tree, you go down through it, it's a staircase, it goes down to a landing down there, and then it goes to the left and down at the same angle and approximately the same distance, and you end up at a door. Now we're assuming we're looking at a small portion of its depth by doing that calculation. My contention in this video is that we can actually calculate the distance with at least some level of consistency. It may not be accurate, but it'll be off by a certain percentage. Let's move forward. We're now looking down through the hole, and if you look really, really close here, you can see a very small line here. We're looking at the landing. This is the wall, and this is the floor of the landing at the bottom. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, I want to say 5, 6, maybe 7, 8 bands of light from the entrance all the way down. We can see it. But in the video, because of the way the video is done and the dramaticism of it, it seems much deeper. Now I want to point out that this information on the screen here has to do with the tallest staircase on the planet, which goes up over 1 kilometer and goes over a distance of over 3 kilometers apparently. And it uses a ratio of distance traveled versus distance dropped, of it dropping 100 feet for every 150 feet you go forward, up or downhill. That's how slope works. It's called a 49% slope. Anything more extreme than a certain amount becomes dangerous because you could be at the top here and fall the equivalent to a couple of 100 feet downhill while being pummeled by the edges of the staircase. So no staircase built by anybody, unless they absolutely couldn't do it any other way, is going to be more than a certain angle. And I also want to point out that staircase in Switzerland going up a mountain is taller than the tallest building on the planet by 3 times over or something. But they use a relatively shallow 150 to 1 ratio, or 1.5 to 1 ratio. Let's move on. Now we see the entranceway here. We're down into it. And we see that a couple of things I want to point out. Everything is in 50% gray color. 50% gray is not used in the real world for a lot of things, but it is used for doing some filming and some work. Now again, Kane Pixels' channel is notorious for using Blender or other utilities to build false three-dimensional environments and avoid using real-world practical effects. Hint, hint, that's foreshadowing. I want to point out that the staircase here is depicted as being mounted against this very tightly, but you can see slight gaps, but over here a big gap. Almost like it's tilted on its side and this is gravitationally pulled down and we're looking at a fixture that the camera's tilted exactly 90 degrees. I also want to point out that if you render something like this in a game engine or in Blender and leave a dead space here, it'll work, but it adds extra complexity and processing time, and you wouldn't see this in the real world, so why do so? Meanwhile, the ceiling seems to be, well, sealed up nicely. Anybody out there who does 3D rendering knows what I'm talking about. I also want to point out this looks exactly like foam core that's been coated with filler. Let's move on. On a general access staircase, each step must be a certain number of millimeters high, and due to the max riser and minimum tread code safety standards, a 45-degree angle is not used at all. It would be avoided because of all sorts of things. The angle is usually around 30 to 35 degrees. I'm using 35 degrees or a 70% slope. That's 142 feet of distance, and then, of course, it was supposed to say for every 100 feet of drop. So let's move on. I want to point out here that the reason you know we're looking downhill, if you think about it, besides these lines here occasionally, is these lights point this way and lights point down. It's not like you could just swivel them the other way, and because we're just using a video signal and we're watching it on a computer screen or TV set, we could just make it look like we're going uphill when we're going downhill and vice versa. Let's move on. The oldest view beneath the earth video at 3 minutes and 20 seconds or so, we can see 8 lights at any time. We hear 24 steps taken between lights, and that's around 16 seconds between them. That's 192 steps for all of those, or around 100 feet of drop, 107, and 152 feet of distance is my presumption at this point. But again, if we didn't have these lights, I didn't want to say that, pointing away from us, we would assume that we could be going uphill or downhill if you just don't have any cues. At the 4:15 mark, while under a light, he looks back down and we can see 6 or 7 lights and a stop. Right here is our landing spot here. Again, we're assuming we're looking downhill because, again, the lights are pointing away from us. They would hang down, right? We can see the first landing very clearly now. This is the cutoff line here. I obscured it by accident. This is the wall, this is the floor, and we're looking through it. At 4:07, he looks back up, and we can see the underside of the lights. That's how we know we're looking up, right? And again, here we have our line. We also have some lines going this way. We see 5 lights, and then the offset entrance sunlight from that hole that we came through. At 4:14, while under a light, we see 6 or 7 lights and a stop at the bottom here. And then we see this, which, if you want to, you can go frame by frame, looks exactly like a Starbucks cup cut in half and stuck to a wall. Now remember, Kane Pixels is notorious for doing everything in Blender, but yet I'm seeing what looks like a real-world Starbucks cup instead of just using a normal light fixture that are, he would have them as downloadable items that you can get off of any 3D warehouse thing on the internet and dump into Blender. Also, he has gaps on this side, which we already saw, but there's also seems to be gaps here. That means that if it's Blender, it's going to have to actually render all of that and then throw out most of it and create a shadow. But again, if you're looking at a staircase, most staircases wouldn't have these gaps. There's no reason to. And yet the ceiling has 0 gap. It's a nice, tight, clean fix. Let's move on. Now we're at the landing at 4:48, and we can call this 14 lights deep if you do the counting of it. That's 336 steps, around 187 feet of drop, and 266 feet of distance at minimum. Now we turn to the left and look downhill at 4:54. We're under that light, and we can see 8 lights, 192 steps, yada, 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 yada. At that level, deeper down, the wall design is indicated right here with these pockets that it's in solid material. Up high before, when we were looking uphill, when we were looking downhill or uphill, these were smooth-sided, which indicated, if you were to treat this as a real-world thing, that they were heavily reinforced because of dirt and everything soft. Down here, you can get away with having pockets taken out to save cement, and you'd use forms for that every time you put them in and then pull them out. Okay. Anyway, rebar and lagging aside, again, we still have gaps in the floor-to-wall connection. No welds going on. Again, Blender would be mad. At 5 minutes, we are under a light and see 7 to 9 more lights going downhill. At this level deeper down, the wall design indicates it's cemented over solid stone, and it has to have just reinforcements every once in a while. You can have a really thin layer for potentially cutting holes or something. At 4:54, we're under a light, and we see 8 to 9 lights, and then darkness below, this dark space down here. And we get certain distances here. Now we're apparently looking uphill again. We're now in the darkening area. At 5:03, he looks up, and we see 8 or 9 lights here, and the offset light sunlit entrance, because he turned around. We were looking this way, now we're turning up. The shallower depth had required more spraycrete, cement, and rebar as lagging. I'm repeating myself, but this is important as a presumption. And again, the only reason we know that we're looking uphill is the lights are tilted this way. Think about it. If you ignore them, well, that can't be if we have a 1.5 to 1 ratio on our staircase. Okay, let's move on. At 9 minutes, he looks back from the door landing. He's 85 steps down from that light source. I counted the sound of the steps from that last light he passed. 42 to 47 feet of drop, 60 to 68 feet of distance, and I'm adding that to the number we had from here. The door landing, if this is reality based, is almost 400 feet down to 450 feet, about 450. Now, we're going to go back through it real quick here. Number one, while looking at him move around, you can see some defects in it, which people would say, okay, that's the render being depicted, and in here is either a dark cloth or a green screen or whatever. Okay, cool. Next, when we're looking down here, okay, cool. Looks like it should. Again, we have Dixie cups for lights. This thing, that looks like foam core. That looks like styrofoam. This looks like cardboard. This is definitely foam core. Cement does not take on exactly the same color. But again, well, he's rendering it in Blender. Okay. And here we see we're on a general access staircase, yada, yada, yada. Information. This shouldn't be, it is 45-degree angle. Okay. And again, why would someone do that? Well, then, if it's exactly 45-degree angle, meaning every single stair step is a 1-to-1 ratio, 45-degree angle chunk of styrofoam you cut exactly square and then chopped it again to get 2 steps, you could just stick it on the floor and walk on it, right? I mean, that's what it looks like. Because, again, all you have to do is tilt the Dixie cups and it looks uphill or downhill. I mean, or you could, well, let me explain. Now, if you're not aware of where I'm going with this, let's do this real quick. I'm going to hit escape, and I'm going to turn it. And then I'm going to bring it back up and pause. Now, I know this sounds stupid, but that is a Dixie cup. The base of it really screams Dixie cup or a coffee cup from Starbucks. This is foam core. It's on the ceiling. The guy turned the camera upside down. This was not filmed in Blender. What you do is you build a box. Basically, you stand up the 8-foot by 4-foot wide pallets and make a tunnel. Just make one on each side. And on the floor, you can put down sheets of plywood that'll bow under a little bit. Just got to make them contiguous by knowing how to do it correctly with nuts, bolts, and screws. Then you hang a gray tarp, or you put up cardboard or butcher paper and spray paint it or whatever. And then you draw lines that are, you notice this line goes this way and this line goes this way, and you can see some dots. You put up the paper over your pallets and you draw creases and lines, you notice here and here, at 45-degree angles. Because that way it looks like you're going up or downhill in a staircase. Then you hang your foam core above so you don't ever have to touch it again. You spray paint everything matte gray. And then you spray paint Dixie cups gold or plastic clear see-through cups, which is what I would do, and you put in LED lights. And you just tilt them whichever way you need them to so that you can do this. And you can do this in 50 to 100 feet of tube because you just film it that way. You're walking along the ceiling. It's like when you watch Star Wars, people are looking for wires to hang the little spaceships, but they're underneath. You do everything upside down, it throws people off. That's what I think was going on here. I don't think this is a render in any way, shape, or form. I think this is practical effects. God forbid he used practical effects like they did for all the good movies. So this here, the landing, was probably filmed, it could be filmed upside down, or it could be filmed as an actual real space. Now, the guy can do editing. He's awesome at it. And yes, even that can be done in such a way that it's literally a tunnel with the things upside down. But what I'm seeing here is most likely, this is foam core. It's on the ceiling. This is an upside down shot. Now, why I'm saying that? If this is 3D rendered, why use Dixie cup shapes that look like Dixie cups? If it's 3D rendered, why use 50% gray mode? Why have the floor not weld to the walls? That wouldn't happen in a normal situation. Now, in the video, the character talks about how there isn't any water collected. Well, then it would drain on the side. You could use that as an excuse. But I'm saying this is practical effects because someone could build a tunnel like this or even find a tunnel like this and just hang fake stairs underneath it and film this.